Okay, so here I'm just going to record some random rambling thoughts that I was having. So let's go over the 7 Red John suspects in Season 6 and see, I'll rank them in terms of tiers as far as who would have made the best suspect as far as, all sorts of criteria, who would have made the best suspect based on their appearances throughout the show. So we'll start with McAllister, who obviously does turn out to actually be Red John. He's a bottom tier suspect for this reason, right? He appears only in the first season, only in one episode, right? Season 1, episode 2, and then he doesn't appear till season 6. So I won't count season 6's appearances for any of these, because at that point you know that they're all suspects, so now all of them appear in season 6, right? They all dedicate at least one episode to them, where Jane works on a case with them, visualize with Ray or whatever. So they all at least have one episode fixated around them where they give you all these clues and fake outs that, it might be them and whatever, right? So that season 6 is irrelevant because then we're getting into the game of, they're all suspects. So we all get to see at least one episode dedicated to them. But McAllister fails on that level because, again, he only appears in season 6. So he's basically, it's like you're introducing a new character. Oh, we're seeing him for the first time in season 6, which basically you are because you've only seen him in one episode, right? Season 1, episode 2. So he had no presence in the series, so it's arbitrary. You could have literally just introduced a new character, like how they do with Timothy Carter, even season 3. It was almost on that level because whatever you show us in season 6, you could have just said, he's introduced in season 6, episode 1, new character. And then whatever you see from there is just them knowing it's already him and you already knowing he's a suspect, right? So that's going to apply to all the suspects. So he only appears once and he only appears, 5 seasons before. So there's no value to him as a suspect because he's just arbitrary. For example, think about it from the audience perspective. Let's say the audience wanted something to latch onto that, I had a theory, it could have been him. Nobody had that theory. Why? Because he only appeared in one episode. And it was 5 seasons before. So what clues, one way or another, could they have been giving you? Nothing. There's no clues. And of course, they hadn't decided themselves, but it's think about it from a viewer's perspective. Nobody suspected it's him because you never see him again. He does have that creepy scene with Grace, right, where he's, they're doing this thing where they're sending Grace down the street to... she's alone, she broke up with her boyfriend, quote unquote, Rigsby, posing this act, and then she's walking down alone on the street to see let's see if somebody comes after this redhead girl, and then it seemed like he's acting a little creepy and forceful with her, using the guise of his law enforcement role to, maybe get her somewhere. It's interesting to speculate on that in retrospect, knowing that he's Red John. It could just be incidental, he could just be genuinely trying to help, because he wouldn't be so maybe obvious about it, but... Then again, she is alone, so that could have been a rare slip-up moment. But the reality is they're not giving you anything as the audience to work with. That's the problem, right? That moment is just a fake-out villain moment for the episode, right? Because there's a scene later, or that's even in that scene where they're watching what's happening with Grace, that Lisbon says, he was there that night, meaning McAllister. He was at the bar that night, whatever, where the victim left. Right, so, it could have been him. So he's a fake-out villain for that episode where, it could have been him in season 1, episode 2. There was no thought going towards the longer big picture. So if you want to use that as a clue, look, he's a little creepy, fine, but that's completely nonsense because there's no other presence of him at all. So if you were trying to build a case as a viewer or build any sort of profile for him, you would have had nothing to work with. It would have been the equivalent of, he appears in season 6, and then that's it. So for the first time, right? So that is a low caliber suspect, bottom tier. Just to establish the tiers, I'll give you an example of each, right? So season, what else comes with that? I'll just give some other thoughts on that. You see him lose the rock, paper, scissors game. So that's one of those disqualifying elements where you would think, he can't be Red John because he would be smart enough to win that or whatever. But so that's the problem. People bring up Bertram's poker face, Bertram had a bad poker face when he's learning how to play poker later on in the series, right? Jane's helping him or something. So how could he be Red John? But see, that's what I mean. Every suspect has some disqualifying element that way, right? That, they couldn't be because of blank. Brett Stiles is maybe too old. How could he be with Rosalind Harker and stuff like that? And he's too physically unfit and stuff like that. Ray Hafner is too much of a pushover where Jane kind of clowns him when in season 4, episode 1, like where Ray's trying to replace Lisbon as Jane's boss, right? And then he clowns him and outmaneuvers him to basically replace him again and get Lisbon back. So how could Red John be outmaneuvered that way, right? So that would disqualify Ray. The fact that he's ousted as the boss and he's kind of a pushover. Jane's always talking shit to him, like in the elevator. You have a comeuppance, and then Jane says, oh, you're a worse psychic than you were a cop. Like, they have that conversation. So would Red John let somebody talk to him that way? But that's why, again, McAllister fails that level because he's losing rock, paper, scissors, and in episode 2 of the first season, he's like this bumbling cop-like figure where he's not at all what he's portrayed in season 6. That's actually the one thing that would make it super obvious. When you see him in season 6 on the Duck Pond Killer case, right? He's actually super smart, and he's out deducing Jane, where he comes up with, oh, the victim smells like oregano. So he's like doing what Jane's doing, but he's sort of matching him and being better. He wasn't like that at all in season 1, right? So that right there is a red flag. Why all of a sudden is he that smart and able to deduce things that even Jane can't? He's almost showing off and showing up Jane in a way that he was trying to do in the first season, but he couldn't do. This is one interesting theory that I came up with, though, that almost would help the McAllister case or add strength to his character. In other words, the events of the series, right? Red John had previously killed Jane's family, but he had no, like, there wasn't like this ongoing game between them. Jane appears on TV, and he's saying, oh, like, I'm helping the police catch Red John, apparently, which maybe that should have even been left out of the writing, because this was before anything happened between them, but that's why it's brought up in the interview, and he calls him evil, and he's a pathetic, sad man, whatever, right? Then Red John kills his family, but then it ends there. There's no, like, relationship between the two where, you know, it seems like there's a layover. Like, yes, maybe Jane's still trying to catch him, but then he joins the CBI. But Red John hasn't taken, like, a clear interest in him yet, let's say. Then, when he meets him in episode 1, 2, this is where the game really begins. That's why it's relevant that McAllister appears so early and in just episode 2. In other words, that's why does the series start with that episode? Basically, the intro episode and then that one. It starts with that because during that interaction, right, Red John maybe hasn't paid that much attention to Jane. He just heard on TV that, oh, he said some shit about me, so I'm going to kill his family, right? That's all. And then he doesn't care about Jane. It was that when he played the rock, paper, scissors game, maybe he genuinely loses, right? And he's like, oh, shit, this guy's actually impressive. And so, you know, besides that just being potentially foreshadowing and also inconsistent with the characterization, like, oh, how could Red John lose that? He's putting on the act there. And so almost the way I would explain it if I was trying to show for the thing, even though they had no idea then who it was going to be, this is what I would put together to try to make it make sense, is that he was putting on his act as McAllister, and he wasn't, you know, he had no knowledge of Jane aside from, oh, he said that shit about me. I don't really care about him beyond that. He's a fake psychic. He's a fraud. You know, he's a loser celebrity, you know, for being a psychic, appearing on TV and talking shit about me. That's his only experience with him, and he didn't care about him otherwise. But then when he sees him with the CBI, and when he works on the case with him, he's actually impressed and like, oh, this guy could be fun to play with. So now he starts playing all these games with Jane from that point. I don't think he had done anything to Jane before that. In fact, in the besides kill his family because of what he said on TV. But there was no ongoing rivalry. Like, Jane joined the police to try to catch him, but Red John didn't care, right? I don't think there's any reference that Red John does anything to him. The way that he trolls him throughout the series, like he kidnaps Christina Fry, and he does all these kind of other things, right, in and around Jane and to do with Jane. So that element is relevant because it's like, oh, the series starts there because this is where Red John takes interest in Jane, and it's happenstance. They happen to be working on the same case together. Jane's very impressive, and so, you know, Red John's like, oh, he's not just a psychic, he's actually, you know, a pretty good detective, and he's smart in these other ways that actually would be fun to play with him and are impressive. So now all of a sudden he takes interest in Jane because he meets him and works with him so closely on that case, right? That's the trigger point of why the series starts there, why that rivalry begins, why Red John starts taking a sudden interest in Jane at that point, because before that he hadn't done anything, again, besides that one moment on TV. There wasn't this sort of game that they were playing, right? Whereas cat and mouse, I don't think there's any reference of that, right? Red John hadn't done anything to him. Even like in episode 1, the pilot seems like, oh, he puts a piece of paper under the door, right, mocking him, pretending to be Red John. But that was just a killer in episode 1. That wasn't actually him, right? He was just pretending to be him, sort of playing with that idea. And so, right, like the show is setting up that, oh, look, Red John might be teasing Jane. And then Jane says a line that can be mocked in retrospect, like, Red John wouldn't risk capture just to taunt me, even though the whole series is him basically doing that, and especially at the end where he comes to the church just for that reason, when he doesn't have to, just to taunt him, whatever. But that aside, right, that's where the rivalry begins. That's where you see the higher occurrence of, oh, now all of a sudden, why did Red John suddenly take an interest in toying with Jane and sticking it to Jane and stuff like that? Not just because he's trying to catch him, but because he actually personally encountered him there and had that experience on the case. And the other characterization to try to justify his stupidity, which I wouldn't really do, and again, he's just meant to be a bumbling sort of comic relief character, some sort of fake-out villain potentially for that episode as that culprit for Season 1, Episode 2, but also he's supposed to be like one of these adversarial characters that you see throughout the beginning of the series, where, for example, they keep questioning Jane's abilities, like, who is this guy? And it gives Jane an opportunity to show off to the audience, like, oh, he's a psychic and he has all these abilities. So you see a lot of those fake out villains, people, or not fake out, like people playing tough or questioning Jane's abilities just so he can show off early on in the series. Okay, so we're starting with McAllister, and so he's a lower tier villain. So what I'm trying to do is, or suspect, what I'm trying to do is sort of create a logical profile for them, sort of buffer it if I was trying to justify, why it's him and how it's him and all the clues to do with it, and also just rate, like, how good of a suspect really were they, things like that. So just since he is actually the ultimate reveal, I'll rate that just briefly. The fact that the actor is good, obviously, Xander Berkeley, he does a good job, but the writing in that scene is a little weird. The way he loses is inconsistent with his character. Obviously, he'd be more careful, he'd have more weapons on his person. I've already gotten into all that. Like, why does he only have one pistol? Where was his car that he came in with? Where was his escape plan? If the police had showed up unexpectedly, Red John's always prepared for that situation, even though Oscar's outside. It's like, where was the thing? Where was his escape route? Where was his... He sort of held all the cards. He came to that church by his own volition. Jane didn't do anything to earn that. Right? So he shows up just to gloat, and then he could just kill Jane, but he has to show up just to gloat. He has to take the breadcrumbs. He has to have no other weapons. He has to have... This is a serial killer. I mean, he'd have a taser. He'd have a knife, like he always did. He'd have a other concussion bomb, like he had in Jane's house. He was so prepared, just 2 episodes before. So I'm using their own writing against him, like... He was just going to a meeting where he maybe suspected what Jane was going to do, but he didn't know the clue Jane had, the tattoo, right? He had no idea about that. And so he had the concussion bomb, the lethal bomb ready. He had the DNA swab body double to put in his place. He had all that ready, just in case. Maybe nothing would have happened. Maybe Jane just strikes out again, like he had been the whole series, not having anything really of substance on him. Right, so that would be the one moment I would say, that's the one chance you actually have to beat Red John in context of the show, even though he still is toying with you and he could kill you at any time if you really felt threatened by you. In the context of this game theory of the show, he could have said, okay, he's holding the shotgun in McAllister's face with the one clue upper hand that he got, and even that's sort of a handout. Like, for 6 seasons, Red John doesn't give you any substantial clue, so how do you finally end up catching him? Do you finally overperform and do something amazing, or do you just get lucky and the writers hand certain clues to you in your lap? Like, oh, Keira Tinsley, before she dies, tells you about the tattoo. This is in season 6. So, what, Red John's just sloppy once, and that gives you a clue? That's what it would take to catch him? And then he shows up uncharacteristically, unprepared in the church, so that's how you catch him? So, in other words, you're catching him. It'd be like... you write a villain who's like really, or a character who's really capable, and how did they finally lose? How did they finally get caught? Oh, they just slip up. They just messed up. So that's not satisfying because it's like, well, that could have happened at any time then. He could have just messed up in season 1, right? So you're not really earning it based on the character that you wrote. So on one hand, you want to milk him for 6 seasons, and then on the other hand, you want to, when he's beaten and you want to get rid of him, you say, well, he's just a man. They try to justify it this way. So you built him up as this big thing, but then you can't treat him that way when you beat him. He should be just as capable in that moment, like, he did everything Red John would normally characteristically do. Be prepared, have other arsenal, have other resources, escape plan, and then you still beat him then. But that would have just been too hard to do, I guess. You couldn't have written it like that. or at least they didn't bother to do it. So it's very disappointing. Sure, Jane sleuths out the phobia, but again, all these things. The fact that Red John has a phobia is revealed in season 6, right? Sophie Miller has the recorder that he doesn't know about, right? So the phobia comes up in season 6. The fact that he's afraid of birds comes up in season 6. The fact that they're on the roof and he shows some fear of it. The fact that Keira Tinsley shows a tattoo is in season 6. So in other words, none of this stuff is rewarding for the viewer, like, oh, we remember that from season 1 when we saw him, or from some other time when we saw him, which of course we didn't, right? Now here are a few other good clues that you could use to justify it. So I like the performance, but again, he's sort of cartoon villain, just bragging. And the one thing that you miss there, people say, okay, he doesn't have the charisma that Red John's supposed to have, where he, had all this following. He can get people to kill for him, die for him. Rebecca, Dumar from the first season. So many people, right, who are loyal to him in law enforcement and outside. Rosalind Harker. So you don't see the charisma necessarily in that moment. Maybe you could say he's with Jane, so he's not trying to be, but he wouldn't have to try to be. Like Timothy Carter was much more charismatic, and the way that's framed is more serious, like, oh, he's almost getting the upper hand in the discussion, like, don't seek revenge, don't do this, don't do that, and it kind of works out better. Right? It doesn't make him seem like the good guy, but it makes him seem much more complex instead of the way they write him in 6-8 as McAllister is just, oh, look at me, I'm this big bad cartoon villain, and that's it. So then it's almost inevitable, oh, you just come up with some bullshit way to beat him and that's it. But this is the point. The 3 clues that would be relevant. Red John has a phobia. You hear that in season 6 because he goes to Sophie Miller like, oh, he's starting to make mistakes now. So is that really satisfying to beat him? Just the writers have to make him make mistakes to give you clues because he never did that before. Sophie Miller has a phobia. He doesn't realize that she has this recorder, kind of like what I'm using right now, to say the whole profile about him, including he has a phobia. Then, the other clue is what the phobia actually is. That also comes out in season 6. Jane observes him afraid of the pigeon. And then, finally, the Keira Tinsley tattoo. He fails to kill a victim. He runs away before she dies. And then she shows him the 3 dots in her own blood. So those 3 clues that are all integral to catching him all come out in season 6. So in other words, they had no plan, no nothing. So, it's like you don't have a way to beat him, and then you're like, oh, how do we finally catch him? Oh, we'll just have him make a whole bunch of mistakes and hand out some clues to you and just fuck it, right? Just do write it in such a way that isn't true to the character and consistent with the rest of the series. We just got to rush and get this over with. Even the fact that it ends in episode 8 rather than a season finale, like episode 23 or 24, meant that they were trying to rush it. Now, the first 8 episodes of that season are actually pretty good, and it almost plays like a movie. Like, you go into it knowing who the suspects are. Every suspect gets a certain amount of screen time and fake outs to make you think it's them. But that first 8 episodes is very entertaining. It's just mostly the way he loses that's unconvincing. So yeah, let me build up his profile one time, which is, these are all the clues that would point to him. The fact that in the first episode, he's sort of adversarial towards Jane. I'm sort of playing devil's advocate too, because again, they didn't plan it, but I'm just playing the part. He's sort of adversarial to Jane. He's questioning his psychic abilities. He's a little bit rude to him, showing him up a bit at the beginning. Then he is creepy towards Grace. It seems like he could have been the killer in that case. Maybe the people who were the killers were still working for him somehow as part of his group and association and cult-like following that he has. Right, that actually could still be true even in retrospect. So maybe he was going to hand off the Grace to them. So he wasn't actually going to do it himself, but he was going to somehow do it. Or maybe even better, he maybe would have done it on his own, right, hurt Grace and then framed it on them. Because, oh, there's this killer going out killing all these girls with red hair, so I'll just make it look like they did it. And it's a free, easy cover for me. Right, he could have thought like that. So the creepy scene with Grace would kind of buffer it a little bit. And then, finally, the fact that Rosalind Harker says he smelled a pine. Which of those 7 suspects seems like they would? He's a hunter, he's outdoorsy, although you wouldn't still know that until season 6. He just seems like that type. Country bumpkin sort of detective, bumbling detective. So he would be out more in nature rather than the other suspects who are more like indoor suit business executive types. Right, so that characterization is always good. In fact, that one clue could break the case alone, and somebody like Jane would use that. Like, oh, he smells a pine, so McAllister is most likely to smell a pine. But no, I was saying that was the one shot that Jane had to beat him. He's on the couch, he knows he has the tattoo, right, Jane, and so now he suspects him with a shotgun to his face. You would just shoot him right there. That would be your only chance to beat him. Because if you don't do it, then you have the three suspects with the tattoos. In other words, if Jane could have guessed right there which of the three was Red John and shot him right there on the couch, or just shot all three of them, that would be the only way you actually could beat him. Anything else, no. Now he turns the situation around. He has a bomb ready. He knocks everybody out. He kills them. He could have just let Jane die in the bomb blast. He should have, right? He saves his life way too many times. So Jane doesn't really beat him in any meaningful way. He saves his life in season 2, unrelated even to him. Like, sure, they're copycats of Red John, but he's not, you know what I mean? It's one thing saving versus sparing. Like, he spares his life in season 6, episode 6, because he plans to bomb himself, but he saves him from it still. So he saves him in 6-6, he saves him in the other episode in season 6 where he's on the roof, right? He pulls him up, and then he also saves him in season 2 finale. So he saves his life like 3 times. So how is that fair to say that, oh, look, Jane beats him and he's better than him? Like, you know, never mind the whole game theory of the series to say, you know, that Red John could just kill him at any point. There's nothing Jane can do to stop him. He could just come when he's asleep to his house in his bed the same way he did with his family. Right? There's nothing Jane, he has like a security system that's going to stop him. So there's nothing that Jane can do to simply stop him. So he's not only sparing your life the whole series just to play a game with you and toy with you, but he's also, if he was really genuinely afraid of getting caught by you, he would just kill you then. So that's why I don't really buy it. So he's toying with you the whole time, and then he's also going out of his way to save your life. Like in season 2, nobody was coming to save Jane because he was about to die right then, and then Red John saves him. So he spares your life the whole series. He saves your life in season 2. He saves your life again in season 6. Again, both of those are unrelated to him. He's not causing those situations to occur. And then finally, he spares you from his own bomb that he did set up. So how is that fair? If at any point, right, he treated it like Jane, oh, if I figure out who Red John is, I'll just kill him, I'll just shoot him. Why does Jane get to do that, but Red John can't do that if he finds out where Jane is or where Jane lives, which he knows the whole time, right? So it makes him into this otherworldly figure where it's like, he can just do whatever he wants, so he's just toying with you, basically. So the other point is that, yeah, the clues are his adversarial nature towards Jane right from the beginning, season 1, episode 2, the fact that he stalks Grace or whatever, he's being creepy with Grace when they're doing that plan where she pretends to break up with her boyfriend and wander out on the road. And then number 3 is the fact that he smells of pine. Those would be the 3 clues before season 6. And the pine one's actually pretty good because it doesn't mention McAllister, and we're not thinking of McAllister because we don't even know he's a suspect, and actually he hasn't been in the series at all, but that would at least associate when you finally see who the suspects are, right? The fact that he smelled the pine does actually correspond to that. That's a perfect, you know, it could just be, oh, Rosalind lives out in the wood, or Red John's so smart, he just makes it seem like that he puts this pine-scented thing on himself just to throw her off in case she describes him to the whatever, but... Or you know what I said you could have done? You could have made a mold of the face of all the characters who are suspects, right? And then the same way that she identifies that Timothy Carter isn't Red John Carter, right? She goes to his face. Once season 6 starts, and Rosalind's still alive and stuff, I think, right? You could make a mock-up of each of the suspects' faces, and then have her feel all of them, and then she would identify McAllister, right? You could literally do it there as soon as you start to suspect him because she knows what he looks like. And she didn't seem hesitant to really tell you. Like, she was honest about Timothy Carter. So yeah, those would be the clues. And then the characterization that I was talking about is what? He was characterized in such a way that is a little bit inconsistent. Like, he's stupid in the first episode, so I would try to justify this if I was the writers by saying, well, he's putting on the act of McAllister. So the reason, on one hand, he could be pretending, but then, it's a giveaway. He's pretending to be dumb in season 1, episode 2, right? As written, he's not very bright, and he's kind of getting clowned. Then in season 6, all of a sudden, he's smart, and he's out deducing Jane, right, when they're working on the case together. So that makes no sense, and that's a red flag. How did he suddenly become smart? Like that differently. And then the second part is... So that's inconsistent. The way to justify it is maybe he's putting on the act in season 1. It still doesn't help what happens and changes in season 6. But he's putting an act that he's acting dumb in season 1, right? He's playing the role of the sheriff, and he's not used to dealing with somebody like Jane in that role. So it's not that Red John couldn't beat him rock, paper, scissors, or something like that. It could be one of 3 things. He's genuinely losing to Jane, and it's just like he's impressed. Wow, this trick is actually even working on me. Or number 2 is he could be pretending to lose. Or number 3 is he could be playing the role of McAllister, and therefore he's sort of pretending, but he's sort of not. In other words, he could be trying to win, but he also can't do it without like somehow revealing himself like that he's a lot smarter than what he is. So he's trying to beat him while still playing the role of McAllister, but he's not used to doing that. Like where I'm going to act smart temporarily, but I'm acting dumb overall. So he's sort of exposing his act that like, oh, I can't turn it off when I need to. Right, I'm just so used to always playing dumb. So he feels a little bit challenged there, like, oh shit, I'm out of my element because I can't reveal how smart I am, or that would look weird. But I also don't want to get shown up by Jane, so like, oh, I'm losing rock, paper, scissors while keeping up the McAllister act, and I can't really drop my act either. Right, so he wasn't sure what to do there. So simply he's just playing dumb, but that's the way you could try to justify it. So that would be my whole explanation of him, and I'll also come up with like a theory on the identity, like how they behave and stuff like that once they would be revealed as Red John. So he was very passive aggressive and stuff again. The one part that's missing with that is the charisma. He doesn't seem charismatic at all in that church scene. He's just cartoon villain. Look at me. Look at my master plan. You didn't figure this out. You have no idea how I fooled you. Like it's just all cliche stuff that he's just there to show off, and no charisma, and also no love of the game that they've been playing. Like Red John always had that competitive spirit, like where he's having fun toying with Jane, right? He's doing it sort of in a upbeat, jovial sense. Like, I'm enjoying toying with you. That's the characterization that he always had. So Timothy Carter has that, where like he was always having fun with it, and now he's bored and he's done with it and he wants to move on. So with McAllister, you don't get that. He's being more passive aggressive, like, who are you? And you don't know me. You don't know anything about me. But we've already been through that. That's why he killed his family, and he even says that. That's why your wife and kid are dead. But we've known that for 6 seasons, so nothing new is coming out. So he's just beating like a dead horse, and he's sort of like just being passive aggressive. Where's the love and the joy for the game of this back and forth little sort of contest you've had with him? That was the whole reason why Red John was toying him the whole series. He enjoyed that. Where's the fun? It's almost like when he's tricked by the pigeon or whatever, right, and Jane had the gun prepared, he would have almost been happy, like, wow, that's really impressive. You really, you finally beat... That's even what he says, Timothy Carter. He says, against all odds, you prevailed. He's almost patting him on the back and saying, impressive, wow, that's good. He still intends to get away, but, like, McAllister is just completely, like, he's all passive-aggressive, but he was upset about it originally, but now 6 seasons later, it's like, oh, you really struck a nerve. But he's also been toying with Jane ever since then, and we've had interactions with him since then. So he was never passive-aggressive at any other time. He was more so just enjoying the game and sort of trolling Jane, so it's different. He had a more lively, upbeat, almost fun quality, even if, again, he's still a serial killer and he's still the bad guy. It wasn't the same thing, right? He's just being straight up, like, bitter about it, but he's the one who chose to let Jane live that long and toy with him because he's presumably enjoyed it. So, right, you don't see that love of the game, basically, that they're playing, that it would characterize Red John the whole way. Okay, so in closing, that's just why McAllister is a bottom-tier suspect, despite my efforts to try to justify him. I'm trying to put all those clues together. But he's a bottom-tier suspect for this following criteria, and then I'll give you an example of a middle-tier and then a top-tier suspect, and then we'll do all the rest of them and fit them in there. So bottom-tier suspect is McAllister, and the reason why is because you only see him once in the first 6 seasons, up until season 6, and so again, anything after that is fair game, because they're all going to appear there, so it's a moot point. So he only appeared once, so it's a waste of the whole series, like, oh, we're giving you clues or little hints or anything to work with, any sort of thing to come up with a theory for it. But we're actually not, because there's just nothing there. So nobody had him as, like, before they tell you he's a suspect, you had forgotten he even existed. Who would have said he's Red John? Maybe a few people would have extrapolated on the season 1, episode 2, just because, oh, well, he's passive-aggressive towards Jane, or he's creepily stalking Grace. But aside from that, you're not going to say he's the whole overarching villain of the whole series still, because he's kind of stupid and bumbling and losing rock, paper, scissors. So he's almost meant as a comic relief adversarial character, like there are some early on, just to try to have Jane show off by contrast. It's sort of a common writing technique for that kind of character. Somebody questions his abilities, and then he shows them up. That happens in the first few episodes at least, too. So that point is that nobody really would have suspected him. He doesn't appear enough at all, really. Only appears in season 6. So there's just nothing to work with there. And yeah, so a middle tier would be like Bob Kirkland, where he's introduced a little later, like season 5, but at least he appears a few times and has some quality moments that could have been used, like he kills Lennon. He has the board at the end of 519 where it seems like, oh, he's planning all his moves the same way Jane is. Right, so that at least gives you a quality basis. So yes, he appears late in the series. That's why he's not top tier. But at least he appears enough before season 6. And then obviously season 6 is a net positive for everybody. So that's why he's middle tier. He appears a decent amount, but he is introduced a little bit too late still. Then the top tier is like Brett Stiles because he appears early on, season 1. And, several times throughout the series. So it's spread out. He's recurring. It's a memorable character. He has a lot of weight. So he appears as early as season 1, but he feels like almost on average, like once per season or something like that, at least a few times. So that gives him some weight before season 6. So he would have been a top tier just based on the appearances alone. And kind of the quality of the character, too. So to justify McAllister a little bit more, even though, again, he's going to be in this bottom tier, he smells a pine. That would point to McAllister. And also, Rosalind Harker says that. And then the boots, actually, are a good clue. He wears these kind of steel-toe boots or whatever, and they even make a point to mention that in season 6 where he's climbing up the ladder and stuff, like why he doesn't want to climb up the ladder when Lisbon's sort of testing him. When we see Red John in season 2, the finale, where he saves Jane's life from the copycats, he's wearing boots, and you see them and you hear them. So who would have that sense of style? Sure, anybody could just wear it, as they're in their garb, wearing the mask and everything. But that would almost suit McAllister more, too. He's the only one of the suspects that I immediately think of as wearing those kind of boots and having that outdoorsy kind of vibe and sense of style and smelling like pine. So those would be the kind of clues that maybe even seem sketch, but like very vague. But there would be the kind that Jane would use almost to build this profile a little bit, which they're never brought up. That's the problem, right? But whatever. It's like I'm trying to play devil's advocate and come up with a better explanation in theory than even the creators themselves would have done. But no, he's bottom tier because he just simply doesn't appear enough, and nobody was thinking about him. So from a user audience involvement level, it's just 0. There's nothing there. He's just an arbitrary, random, one-off character who they, for some reason, thought would make a good suspect, maybe because they liked the actor, but it was completely useless, okay? But Bob Kirkland, again, he appears a few quality times in season 5, so the only thing that stops him from being a top tier is that it's too late. He does appear a number of times, but he's, just introduced as sort of like a fake-out suspect a little bit too late in. It just feels funny because it's like people would justify it like, oh, of course Red John wouldn't stand out, but then Jane ends up suspecting him anyway along with the rest of the suspects, just based on the fact that they shook hands, I guess, but they technically don't even, I don't think. They play rock, paper, scissors, but I don't know if you would count that as shaking hands or why he would tell Lorelai or how he would tell Lorelai that, but they don't actually officially shake hands, or maybe they do at the end of the case, like he'll say, sorry for doubting you. I'll have to rewatch the ending of the episode, but certainly at the beginning they don't shake hands. But even that point, on the only basis on which Jane would suspect him, is not even accurate to what we see. And you don't see or hear about him anywhere between those seasons, so the problem there is just... Okay, so we're trying to do 3 things here, basically. Rate their presence on the list of the other suspects based on their appearances in the series, right? Like we've done with those 3 as an example. Then we're also going to try to justify why they're a suspect from an audience point of view and how you would have come up with a theory based on them, which again, for that, McAllister was pretty weak because you don't just have much to work with there up until that point. And his whole personality in the 6th season contradicts what we see in the first one, so that would almost make it too obvious that he's suddenly smart. But we try to, again, rate them based on their appearances, how good of a suspect they are, how strong of a theory you could come up with, what that theory is, all the clues, what it's based on. which again, with him, you can sort of extrapolate some good ones. The Grace appearance, the Pine, the Boots, things like that. And finally, and even like Dumar, I would use as an example too. Like, who could you see associating with Dumar and some of these other criminals like Renfrew? All the other types seem almost too sophisticated. Bob Kirkland and Bertram and stuff. They don't really seem like the type, even though you wouldn't, they obviously could have a different personality in that context when they're acting as Red John, but McAllister seems like that sort of country, more free spirit type where he's a little more in with those kind of peoples, right? His personality type's a little more open and laid back, not like so stiff and bureaucratic as some of these other ones, most of them in law enforcement. And so that has a certain merit to it. Like, I could see McAllister and Dumar hanging out, right, and sort of socializing and things like that in a way that I couldn't see with others. Same thing with Rebecca, Rebecca's sort of in law enforcement too, but I don't know, Rebecca and some of these other Lorelei, right? I don't see Bertram hanging out with Lorelei. I don't see, Reed Smith, or I don't see Kirkland. Like, none of them have that sort of chemistry, whereas McAllister, I can kind of see that because he has that sort of countryside in him, where he's, again, a little more free spirit, hunter, likes to be in nature, smells of pine, all that kind of stuff. So you can try to build that profile. Again, it's still weak because I'm sort of extrapolating and going out of my way to try to justify it. So now we look at the other 6 suspects. I guess I could just do those 3 for the beginning. Again, Kirkland had some quality appearances. Oh yeah, one thing I wanted to do was like a disqualifying element for each one. So McAllister couldn't be Red John because he loses at rock, paper, scissors, right? That just means he can't be it. Now you could say, oh, well, he's pretending, but then that kind of ruins it because it's like, well, then anything is just all pretending, so, how can you use that? Then everything they do, so Bertram doesn't have a good poker face, Red John would have a better poker face than that. Bob Kirkland is too socially awkward, where even Lisbon says, when she finds out that Kirkland took Jane hostage and is torturing people or whatever, she's like, oh, I would say I'm surprised, but he, and then Hightower said, oh, he's a weirdo. Like, on a surface level, Red John wouldn't appear like that. He'd appear perfectly normal, perfectly charismatic, right? If he seems weird on the surface, then what act is he putting up, right? What's the point of the act? He's too, rigid, sort of stick in the mud. So that doesn't really work, right? He would be a little more aloof or a little more charismatic, right? Bertram, so again, it can't be McAllister because he loses rock, paper, scissors, and he's kind of a bumbling idiot overall in the 2nd episode of the 1st season. Bertram, it can't be because he has a bad poker face. It can't be Kirkland because he's too socially awkward. Even Lisbon and Hightower can recognize that, so how couldn't Jane? So he's not charismatic on even the act that he's putting up in this sense, let alone what he could do as as Red John. You might say, oh, well, of course he won't show the charisma that Red John would use, but wouldn't he have some other act? Like, why would your act that you're putting up be the socially awkward guy that even Lisbon and Hightower are a little bit reticent of? It doesn't fit. So you don't see the charisma that he's hiding. Like, oh, I could see how he could be a ladies' man with Lorelei and Rosalind. You don't see that, but you also don't see the charisma on the basis that, oh, I would never suspect him because he's such a friendly guy. He's such a charismatic guy in the law enforcement sector either. So he fits neither of those criteria. Socially, he's just weird, right? And then Ray Hafner would, again, be disqualified because, oh, how does Jane easily outmaneuver him when he's going to be his boss? So all of these are like, oh, well, it's not an act, right? These are genuinely the versions of them that we're seeing. Or even if it's an act to be Ray Hafner, but he would be more capable than that. If he wanted to be Jane's boss, he would be. Or, he wouldn't have been outmaneuvered. He wouldn't have been clowned by him. He wouldn't be looking so passive-aggressive, like obsessing over Lisbon, like almost jealous of how much Lisbon likes Jane. All these kind of things that, what does that have to do with being Red John? He seems too ordinary. And then, he just seems like an ordinary guy with some flaws and vices and whatever. And then he also is shown up by Jane like, you're a worse psychic than you were a cop. Like, would Red John let you talk to him like that kind of a thing? So he's too much of a pushover type. Brett Stiles, I guess you could say, is too old, right? Reed Smith is too fat. And then, who am I forgetting? Like, so we could go over, they all can't be for this one simple reason that's pretty clear, right? McAllister is too bumbling and stupid and loses rock, paper, scissors. Bertram has a bad poker face. Then Bob Kirkland is too socially awkward that even anybody can identify. Then Reed Smith is too fat. Brett Stiles is too old. Bertram, again, old and physically incapable, and obviously Reed Smith could be potentially too. They just don't match the body type, that he's supposed to be kind of slender, that even Rosalind says that too. So that throws out, again, both Brett Stiles and Reed Smith because they're too old, they're too physically incapable, or too fat to fit the profile given by both Sophie Miller, and the profile given by Rosalind Harker contradicts that. And, again, to do the physical activities that you would need to do to be Red John doesn't even make sense. Right, how could you be physically capable to kill 70 plus people and do all these kind of crazy escapes and getaways and things that we see? Even the figure of Red John that we see when he's doing killings, like both on Keira Tinsley and in season 2 and stuff, don't match that at all. You could say, oh, well, that's not him, that's one of his underlings or something, but even that just simply doesn't make sense either. Right, it's just too convenient. Then you just write everything off. Everything that doesn't fit, oh, it's just an act, or oh, it's just somebody else. It's not even really him. So then we have nothing to work with, because anything that doesn't fit with what the writers want, it's not their fault. It's just, oh, it's the audience's fault. Oh, no, of course, that wasn't really him. Or, oh, of course, he's just pretending. So nothing means anything then. It's just all arbitrary. So, again, I'm sort of forgetting a suspect here. I don't have like a list in front of me or anything. But who are we forgetting? That's 5 of the 7. So you have, who is left? Just, you had Hafner as a pushover. Right, Brett Stiles. Who am I forgetting? Reed Smith is fat. I'm not sure. Who? Let's go over them once more. So again, let's run down all the suspects once, just the disqualifying factor based on what we know, the appearances of him, how he looks, how he acts, based on all the clues, Rosalind, Sophie, all appearances outwardly, and just common sense. Again, McAllister, first of all, again, loser, rock, paper, scissors, he's bumbling, he's stupid. Then 2, Bertram doesn't have a good enough poker face. Number 3, Bob Kirkland's too socially awkward. Number 4, Ray Hafner's too much of a pushover. Number 5, Brett Stiles is too old. Number 6, Reed Smith is too fat. And then number 7 is Brett Partridge, I keep forgetting. He's too much of a pushover as well. Like, he lets Jane talk shit to him too much, and he just kind of, it's sort of socially awkward too. Sure, he has that creepy vibe that he almost would be showing off how creepy he is, how much he enjoys his job, and he's a ghoul and stuff. But he also, imagine Red John letting somebody talk to him like, oh, if you don't get horny reading Fangoria, I'm Britney Spears, and he's irksome. He just lets Jane talk too much trash to him, even on the beach when they're in the desert with the guy in season 6. In that episode, he's like, you've been looking at me weird and you've been acting sullen with me lately. Like, he just seems genuinely concerned and awkward. Like, you know, he doesn't have any presence to him. He's just like genuine, like, man, you're being weird with me. Or, again, he lets Jane show him up in every investigation that they have. You know, oh, this isn't Red John, but you're the expert, Jane. Don't mind me. Like, he seems genuinely just awkward. How could Red John not have more presence or authority about him? So in that sense, like Brett Stiles has some charisma, some swagger. Even if certain scenes though just don't fit with it. Like the diner scene for Ray, like where he's like, I don't know, he's just too cordial with Lisbon, and it's like, if he was Red John, why would he even entertain that? Like, you don't think I'm Red John, do you? He says to Lisbon, and then Lisbon says, sit down. It's like, well, why do I have to listen? I'm Red John. I don't care what you think. Or he would already know that he's a suspect, so sure, he's pretending like he's bothered by it, but it's like, you're putting on this act as like a pushover that doesn't even fit on a surface level. So both of those fit in that same category. So again, 2 of them are disqualified for appearances. Reed Smith is too big and fat based on what we know, based on what we see, based on witness testimony, Sophie and and Rosalind, based on the appearances of him in season 2 and season 6, you see him actually doing a killing, like on Keira Tinsley, and how he saves Jane, right, walking in the boots and stuff. So that profile doesn't fit at all. So 2 of them are based on appearances, Brett and Reed. 2 of them are based on being pushovers, Ray and Brett Partridge. Then 1 of them is based on also personality, sort of being a pushover in McAllister. So the 2 that are left are Robert Kirkland is kind of too awkward. And then finally, who's the last one? And finally, Bertram doesn't have a poker face. So all that shows you is that on a surface level, there would be one clue that if the series wanted, like Jane would do, oh, this guy uses too much butter, season 1, episode 2, so therefore he's a killer, or oh, this guy has this quality. Like, he would use these very arbitrary things to either justify this person is a killer, or he isn't, or he couldn't be. But yet with him, then, oh, it's all an act. That's why those qualities wouldn't disqualify them, because they're just acting to be that way. Or somehow it just doesn't matter, right? They'll just justify, oh, Reed Smith is fat. How does that make sense? We've seen what Red John looks like, but oh, that wasn't Red John then. Or oh, somehow Sophie Miller is wrong, or Rosalind and Lorelai are wrong with how they're, describing how they look, or anything like that, or how you would imagine they would be intimate with them. It doesn't even make sense. Like, what, is he wearing some sort of bodysuit that's somehow fake? If Reed Smith, so that's one of the worst ones, is Reed Smith. The body profile doesn't match at all. Yeah, those are the disqualifying elements for each suspect. Again, on a surface level to the audience, or even in Jane's sometimes way of doing things and thinking, it would disqualify them. Oh, he couldn't possibly be. Because Bertram doesn't have the poker face, obviously. That would be one example. One thing that does it for me, just personally as a viewer, you see some of these characters, especially, this is the downside of the ones who appear for too long, but the sad part with that is, oh, McAllister works because you didn't see him enough, so the time, you only see him in one episode, so that doesn't disqualify him. The way that, like for me, with this example, you see some of these characters, they're socially awkward at times, or they have hiccups, Ray is struggling with Jane's antics, or Brett's treating like a pushover, Brett Partridge, or Bertram is sometimes even awkward outside of just a poker situation. They have like these social little quirks that it feels like if they were Red John, wouldn't they be more in control of that? So you're expecting them to be perfect, even if perfect in the role that they're playing, right? They have like these little slip-ups and weird moments. And so the point is that you feel like basically, for me personally, like I see like, oh, Bertram looks a little anxious here, but Red John wouldn't be anxious here, even if it's about something work-related, right? Wouldn't he be more efficient in his job? But that's the sad part with McAllister, that even though he appeared less than any other suspect, right, up until season 6, right, he has 1 episode, Brett Stiles has at least a few, I can't remember, like 4 or 5, or maybe that includes season 6, but he at least has a few. Ray Hafner has a few, the one to do with the Allison farm, or whatever it's called, where the Smiley Face is on the barn. He's in that episode, as well as some other ones. And then, what else do we have here? Brett appears, Ray appears, Kirkland appears, albeit only in really season 5, right, as we get close to knowing he's a suspect, so that one almost isn't as good. Bertram appears a couple times, Reed Smith appears a couple times, but they all appear at least a few. Brett Partridge actually appears the least because his appearances are super brief, right? Usually it's just in a season opener or finale when it has to do with Red John, and he's kind of the Red John expert, even though he's really not. He's just always on those cases, and so he appears the least in terms of screen time. So you choose the suspect with the least amount of screen time, or the least appearances in terms of episodes, but then that still ends up not working to the favor that I was talking about, because, oh, so he must not have a disqualifying moment, because you expect him to be so perfect all the time if he's Red John, but he's still not so perfect. He still has the rock, paper, scissors moment. He still has the fact that he didn't shake Jane's hand. He still has the fact that he's kind of bumbling and stupid, and then when he appears again in season 6, he's suddenly smart. So even with a character who has the least screen time, where you could fuck it up the least, he's still inconsistent with the characterizations, because how does he suddenly change? How come he's stupid? Again, he could say it's an act, but why is he portrayed in that bumbling way? Why is he losing rock, paper, scissors? It might seem like you're you're picking on little things, but like even with somebody who has the least amount to mess up, because you're not seeing him on a regular basis in his everyday duties like Bertram or some of these other characters, you still don't pick one that where it doesn't disqualify him. That's the one advantage that McAllister could have had, that he appears so little that he has less disqualifying moments, but he still does, right? Even within that one episode, and then anything beyond that, season 6 portrayal, give or take, he's pretty in control there, right? Where if you look at all the scenes of McAllister in season 6, they don't feel too bad, right? Where maybe you could interpret it one way, maybe not, but ultimately, I don't know. Yeah, seeing someone struggle in their everyday active duties, even behind closed doors when no other characters are around, so you're seeing them privately, like Bertram or Smith or Ray, that's what kind of disqualifies it to me a little bit, or even being a pushover. That's just my own personal preference, that if I see somebody like, would Red John really struggle with his daily duties or work activities in that context, whether he's showing it to other people or himself, he's stressed about this, he's having this little problem, right? Would that really happen? You're expecting, again, the portrayal to be perfect all the way through, which none of them are, right? And there's certain scenes that stand out to me, maybe like, Brett Stiles, some of them in season 6. Like Brett Stiles is, a dying man does not fear death, and he's genuinely dying, right? In the embassy where Jane's trying to convince him to go, he seems so at ease and so laid back, right? Like there's nothing, and the fact that he genuinely is dying, right? It doesn't seem like if he had been Red John, he just seems too casual about it. Or again, even Ray in the diner, it's not a question that, they should be freaked out or angry or anything, but like, I don't know, they seem either too bothered or too unbothered, not somewhere in between, where it's like, Ray is too bothered at the diner, where Red John would already know he's a suspect and he wouldn't care, so why is he giving such strong vibes, one way or another? Right, even when he's in the hospital bed with Lisbon, like, you seem like I'm making you uncomfortable. So why would Red John say that if he knows he's a suspect? You could say it's an act, but that act is almost too... It's like you're letting it slip then, if it is an act. And then the other side is... with like, who else? Like Brett Stiles. Like, again, he's too casual, or there's something just sort of missing from the character in season 6 where there's nothing, I don't know, he's just chilling at the embassy and he's about to die soon. So if it was Red John, how would that really be satisfying? It would just be weird, right? Like, you almost feel bad for him, or taking revenge on him almost doesn't work. So all these kind of things are weird. Again, if it was like Reed Smith almost has a temper. He feels a little bit sloppy, disorganized, he's too big. So there's all these different qualities and characterizations you can have. So, I don't know. So we've officially ranked McAllister as one of the bottom tier ones because he's too... he doesn't appear enough, and even the appearance he has isn't very strong in season 1 for one way or another, whether there's anything for you to latch on to. It's just kind of overall weak, and of course they didn't have a plan. And if you were going to go with somebody like that, you could have just as easily introduced like a new character in just season 6, which is almost what they do with Bob Kirkland. Like, he's introduced as like this really smart, perfect archetype. Even though I have issues with the social awkwardness, it's like, he's put in as the ultimate fake out. He shakes Jane's hand, and then the next episode, Lorelai says, you shook his hand. Right, even though there's no way he really could have communicated because it happens too quickly and Lorelai doesn't, she's on screen or something. But the point is that if, he's introduced, you shake the hand, then the hand clue is brought up right the next episode. Then also you see him kill Lennon, so that seems like, he would have to be Red John. Why else would he kill Lennon? Because then it almost doesn't make sense. He's doing it so that Jane doesn't get to Red John first, I guess, but that's stupid. And then also the next episode after that, I think 519, he's shown with the board, like he's planning everything out the same way that Jane is. So the reasoning there is like he's shown as like this perfect figure that could be Red John, who's introduced in season 5 to fill that role as, like, again, either somebody who actually is Red John or the ultimate fake out for Red John. So that is definitely something to consider. Like, that's why he's put in there. So again, that's the flaw that you often have with series like that. If you have somebody who could potentially be a villain, it's like you need to either portray them perfectly all the time, otherwise it's not believable, or you're showing them too much. So the one advantage with McAllister, they didn't show him enough, but it still doesn't really add anything to it then. And again, it doesn't do any favors to the audience perception, because nobody's going to be guessing that, I think it's him because he acted a little weird in the 6 seasons ago and we've completely forgotten about him, and you're only reminded about him because he's brought up as a suspect. So this is completely arbitrary. Never mind that the ending itself isn't good either, but that's a separate issue because... So I'd like to almost portray how each of these guys could have been, too. So if it had been Reed Smith, I'll come up with a theory on what they would have looked like. Reed Smith would have looked like, he's actually wearing some sort of fake disguise, right? So that's not actually what he looks like. His chubbiness is all just fake, and so he looks completely different underneath. That would actually be the reveal. Right? Think about a similar church moment. So Reed Smith would come into church, and it's he's actually assuming he would have been the one who you thought was dead. And then he slowly takes off his mask, and he slowly takes off the parts of his chest that were actually just fake body armor, sort of. I don't know how to explain it, right? It's all not really him, and he looks completely different underneath what is actually just a disguise to make him look fat, to throw you off. Right? That would have been the reveal there. His personality was always very sort of outwardly aggressive towards Jane. He was accusing him of killing Benjamin Marks and this stuff, so he's being outwardly adversarial, which again, you could say, it's just still an act, or, he's toying with him, or, I don't know, would Red John really be that outwardly adversarial? Because that would make it too obvious, but then, it's just an act, but then it's not really a good act that makes you seem innocent, so it's an act where you're sort of toying with him. So it's you can't be wrong either way. But ultimately it comes down to the simple fact that that's how I would portray that twist. Reed Smith is going to be, he was just acting that way. He was just in a disguise, right? That's the only way I could make it make sense. If it was Brett Stiles and Ray Hafner, I almost have a theory where it could be both of them together. It's revealed that, Ray was maybe the brawn, the one going out there physically doing the killings. Brett Stiles was the brains of the operations, behind the scenes, planning everything out. And so they have that sort of, they're working together, and they're both Red John in sort of two halves, using the resources of Visualize and Brett's charisma and Ray's sort of physical good looks. And so whenever they refer to Red John physically, whether it be, Rosalind Harker or the other chick, Sophie Miller, and even when you see him doing the killings, that could have always been Ray, I guess. And then whenever it's planning or you hear the voice or something, it could have been Brett. Somehow, in the voice in the back of the car in the season 4 finale. I don't know, really, but it could have been them basically working together, where Brett's behind the scenes planning stuff and Ray is doing the physical dirty work. Right, that could explain those two. So we've already gotten 4 of them accounted for. So Bob Kirkland could have been just super smart and super methodical as the planner that he was being portrayed as. And so the social awkwardness could have been explained away somehow as an act or something, but I don't exactly know. But he would have been the super smart, almost foil to Jane, where he's very similar to Jane, just in the opposite direction. He's equally, methodical and smart and, whatever. I don't know how to explain it better than that. He's just the opposite of Jane, but he's kind of similar to him in how he thinks, and he's technical and smart and planning things in a similar way. So he's just the opposite foil of him in the same context. And then if it's Brett Partridge, obviously he'd be super sadistic, as we kind of see the hints of that, how he enjoys his job a little too much. So that would be more like the clown Joker interpretation. He'd be laughing and, whatever. He'd be almost playful, and his body language, in the reveal moment, would be very whimsical and things like that. He really enjoys killing, and he's that kind of person. right? So the Joker in the original Batman or some of the older school, not so much the Heath Ledger one, because that one's like a little bit darker interpretation, but no, he would just be very sadistic and playful almost. So that suits the playful nature of Red John that we always see, right? And then finally we have who is left. We got, again, McAllister sort of passive-aggressive, which was weird. That's almost how Reed Smith could be, but that's also how, Reed would have the disguise. He doesn't actually look like that. He's not actually that fat. And then finally, you would have Brett and Ray working together. And then you would have Brett Partridge being like the Joker and sadistic and laughing and whimsical, like that kind of interpretation. So then and then Bob Kirkland would be like exactly like Jane, but just the opposite way, using his powers for evil, but very smart and just by the book, sort of methodical, planning things on the board and being a little stiff, stick in the mud, even though that doesn't match the charisma. Doing things in a very well planned out way, like killing Lennon with a little tube. He puts like an air bubble in, or however he does it, planning things out. He's certainly he checked that box at least, that he's smart enough and methodical enough, at least as you see him there. The one moment he gets shown up by Jane is like, maybe you should come work for us, after he says they got a fake list of Red John suspects. He seems genuinely bothered by that in a way that Red John wouldn't be bothered by that. Like, he already knew the list of suspects. So if he was Red John, why would he even have sent the Homeland Security to get the fake list? Right? Why would that be of something that Red John would care about? Because he already knew the list at that point, right? Or maybe that was that before season 6? I feel like that's after. But either way, it's because he uses then the fake list to kill and torture all those people, which of course we don't know that then. But why would the real Red John be interested in a fake list anyway when he has the real one? Or why would he be bothered to learn that it's a fake list? And then finally, who am I forgetting? Bertram. Bertram almost works, but again, he has some of those awkward moments where he would just be like he would be like almost more stiff, like Bob Kirkland too, where he's like, yes, he's socially skilled as he deals with the media. I am many things to many people, he says in season 6. But he would be like sort of how we see him in the church anyway, where he's sort of just laid back, like, oh, what a bunch of liars we are, right? And he's just kind of cordial and friendly almost. But it's all fake and like you know better, or you know how to put on an act. But no, he doesn't match the sort of jovial nature. The only one that matches really that way is Brett Partridge, because he would be like sort of the fun, Red John. Like, oh, he's laughing and whimsical and playful, and he enjoyed the game, and he enjoys killing, and he enjoyed toying with Jane and all that kind of stuff, right? That's what Timothy Carter portrayed, and that's how Red John acts the whole series. Even if we don't see him behind closed doors, he's always that fun sort of type, that he's poking fun and enjoying what he's doing. Right, Brett Stiles doesn't seem like that type. Ray doesn't seem like that type. There's kind of sticks in the mud. Bertram doesn't seem like that type. Bob Kirkland doesn't seem like that type. Even McAllister doesn't really seem like that type. Right, and even when you see him revealed, he's not. He's being too bitter and passive-aggressive. So that playful side of Red John is sort of missing, and from all those, except for Brett Partridge, and then the more serious planning side is missing from, or the charismatic side is missing from Bob Kirkland and Bertram, right? So you're missing the playful side and almost everybody besides Brett Partridge. You're missing the methodical planning side, and like Reed Smith doesn't seem smart enough, McAllister doesn't seem smart enough in the original season at least. So there's a lot of holes with each of them. The charisma is present in Timothy Carter also in the playful side. So they have the textbook example to follow with him, but then they don't. And then like the playful side, the charismatic side is missing from some of these, like McAllister and Ray Hafner and Bob Kirkland. Okay, so let's go over what the suspects are all missing, or what they excel at, and then we'll go over the final ranking. So the physical element, Brett Styles seems too old and unathletic to do the physical feats that would be involved in the killings and things like that. So Brett is both too old, he's not handsome enough, things like that. He does have the charisma and maybe a little bit of the playfulness. He doesn't have the physical element or the handsome element and things like that. Then McAllister doesn't have the charisma and he doesn't have the intelligence based on at least his original portrayal. And even in the later one, again, we don't see the charisma at any point. He's a little friendly and cordial with Jane, but it's not enough to convince you of the other elements. He does have the outdoorsy element, the hunting element, the Dumar, Renfrew, Lorelei, that side of things. I could see him dealing with people like that. The fact of smelling like pine, the fact of liking to hunt, all those kind of things do match. So those are the strengths and weaknesses of those two. Then Ray Hafner doesn't have the charisma. He's kind of awkward a little bit. He is handsome. He does have the body build, things like that he could go out and do the killings. He's sort of intelligent, but he's missing a little intelligence and a little charisma for sure. Brett Partridge is missing a little charisma. He's kind of a pushover, but he does have the jovial, playful side and the physical side. He could certainly do the killings. Reed Smith seems to be missing the physical side. He doesn't match the appearance, the body build. Maybe he's a little unathletic because of his size too. And then finally, he is personality, missing charisma. So Reed Smith is actually kind of the worst suspect, besides maybe McAllister, that even though he does appear more than him, he doesn't have the charisma. He's sort of brutish and just headstrong and whatever. He's a rank and file sort of FBI agent too, as Kirkland says, so he's not like high ranking. He's just very ordinary. He's not charismatic enough. He's not jovial, playful. He's just kind of, again, just ordinary and even a little headstrong, brutish, not intelligent enough. So he doesn't have really anything going for him, not even the appearance. Like, what element of Reed Smith fits with Red John? Nothing. There's not a single quality, right? He doesn't have the personality, he doesn't have the charisma, he doesn't have the looks, he doesn't have the appearance even, body profile, he doesn't have the social skills, he doesn't have the physical skills like to do the killings, he doesn't have the stature. There's just nothing going for him. I don't know what I could even extrapolate, right? He's too aggressive directly towards Jane. Not subtle enough, things like that. And so who are we missing? Bertram has some of the coldness that you would want, the media relations, so there's some charisma in that, but he's missing, again, the jovial, playful side. He does have the build, he does have the athletic, probably, capability, so he's missing mainly just the playful element and maybe some element of charisma. Maybe some level of intelligence. It's hard to say how much they would be, obviously holding that back. Who am I missing now? Brett Partridge, again, it's hard to gauge the intelligence and the charisma. He has the playful side. So I think that's pretty much all of them. Bob Kirkland's a little socially awkward. He physically is a match. He's physically, young enough, strong enough, potentially. He's also very... He wouldn't have the playful side or the social side, but he has also the intelligence, you would assume, to be able to do this. So if we were to rank them, McAllister and Reed Smith would be in the bottom tier, where they have almost nothing going for them. I'll actually put Reed Smith at the very bottom, because again, the body build doesn't match at all. The personality isn't charismatic or impressive at all. So if he had been Red John, I just can't imagine, what made him a satisfying suspect. He's just... nothing. He's ordinary. He's not super smart. He's not super charismatic. He's not super fit. He doesn't match the body size. So he's at the bottom of the bottom tier. Then you have McAllister also in the bottom tier, where again, the only thing Reed Smith has going for him is that he appears more than McAllister. McAllister doesn't appear enough. He's a little more charismatic. He could be a little more playful. He could be maybe a little better physical fit, but he's older by the end of the series, but I guess throughout the reign of Red John, earlier on, he's a little younger towards the beginning, but he's still old, so I mean, they're both not really good fits. Then in the middle tier, you would have Bob Kirkland, Ray Hafner, and stuff like that. Then at the top, you would have Brett Styles and maybe Bertram. So Bertram and Brett Styles in the top tier, Bob Kirkland, Brett Partridge, and even Brett maybe could be a little higher, but Bob Kirkland, Brett Partridge, and Ray Hafner would be in the middle. So let's finish ranking exactly where they would fit in those tiers. So again, let's rank the middle tier. You have those three. Again, Brett Partridge is pretty good. He has some appearances, but they're very short in screen time, so that hurts him a little bit. His personality, again, matches the playful vibe. He's young enough. He's handsome enough. Maybe he's even a little too young. His charisma is kind of there, depending on how you interpret it, but it's missing a little bit, like he's not smart enough or he's not, suave enough. He's getting pushed around by Jane a little bit too much. He seems a little bit awkward that way. So he should be probably in the middle of the middle tier, where he has kind of half the purpose of him. He's missing a little bit of the charisma. He's missing a little bit of screen time. Then Bob Kirkland is going to be actually the top of this tier. He appears enough. His appearances are pretty good, convincing. He kills Lennon. He's in a kind of sophisticated, smart way. He's looking at the board. Like, all these kind of pieces fit together. The only element he's really missing is he doesn't appear enough throughout the whole series. He's introduced a little bit too late, right, season 5. And then he's also not really charismatic enough. He's a little stiff, stick in the mud. Even if you think that's his act, again, it doesn't serve him well, because Hightower and Lisbon both say, oh, I'm not that surprised he ended up doing this, like being a criminal. Like, why would you say that about Red John? You should be surprised, because he should be putting up a better act. So his act would almost be going in the opposite way. It makes him look more suspicious because he's so awkward and stick in the mud, right? But still, he's a pretty good suspect. He's pretty smart. He was almost made to be too obvious that it was him. He shakes his hand, right when that's mentioned. He appears right when we start to put together the list of suspects, so he could fit on there. He's also planning similar to Jane. He's also killing Lennon very conspicuously. So if it had been him, people might even complain it's too obvious, but it doesn't matter whether it's obvious or not. It matters whether it's satisfying or not. Like, he's smart enough. He's, he fits the profile, and all the other ways physically could work. So he's in law enforcement. So he's just really missing the charisma. If he had the charisma, and if he had appeared a little more, he would have been the perfect suspect. If he would have appeared a little bit earlier, not even so much more, because he does appear a decent amount, right? He even has, like, somehow the voice for the way he talks is a little like Christopher Walken-esque. Like, there's a whole vibe going with him that is actually very strong, right? So he would have been a good suspect. And so he would be like the top of the middle tier. Brett Partridge is the middle of the middle. Again, he could have just been helped by appearing more. Not even maybe more times, although he kind of doesn't appear enough. And again, his scenes are too short, and a little charisma is missing. And then the bottom of the middle tier would be Ray Hafner, where, again, he has a handsomeness, he has a little bit of charisma, he still gets pushed around by Jane too much, so you're questioning his intelligence and social skills a little bit. And then you're also questioning his, I guess that's the main thing, that maybe the playful side. But he is smart, he is in law enforcement, and visualize both. That's kind of a strong point. Again, his appearance almost matches what I would think. In Red John, he's sort of handsome, and he does have the charismatic vibe. It just doesn't feel like strong enough. But, he's an overall good suspect. He appears a decent amount. He appears a little bit late, like season 4, but still earlier than Kirkland. So his main weakness is, again, he just seems too much of a pushover, where even if it's an act, it's hard to imagine the same Red John who's so offended by Jane calling him out on TV would have thick enough skin, I guess, to withstand being pushed around so much by Jane and potentially by others, right, where he's not like an alpha dog in his role. So that element hurts. The appearance is fine. The physical element, the age is fine. The intelligence is decent, passable. The charisma is decent, passable. So he's kind of an all-around good suspect. He just he appears a good amount, but he's just not quite convincing enough that he could be like the alpha element, right, that you would maybe need to be. And so far we would have the list going. Number 7 is Reed Smith. Number 6 is Thomas McAllister. Number 5 is Ray Hafner. Number 4 is Brett Partridge. Number 3 is Bob Kirkland. And this is taking into account, all the elements, the appearances, when they appear. Those are the main weaknesses, I guess, of Bob and Ray, that they appear too late. Right, not even that they don't appear enough. In fact, they appear more than McAllister. They appear more than Brett Partridge, certainly for longer. So that element is actually strong with them, the number of appearances that they have. But again, just a little bit too late. Brett Partridge at least appears earlier. McAllister appears earlier. Although, again, only one, so that's not really much of a strength. Reed Smith also appears kind of late in, I think he appears only in season 5, right, at the beginning of season 5. So sort of similar to Kirkland, that you're going to see them kind of too close to when the suspects are considered suspects. It's like we've just met these characters this season, and now they're a suspect. It's like, that's too perfect. We don't know them from before. And then the top tier is going to be Bertram and Brett Stiles. Bertram is going to have to take the number 1 spot, even though, and they do fake you out by thinking it's him until they say it's McAllister, but, you know, where like Jane announces, oh, it's Bertram. But the thing is, physically he matches at least a little better. Brett Stiles is too old, but he does have the charisma. He has maybe a little of that playful possibility. He has visualized going the cult leader element that works. So the main weakness is just he's too old and too physically unfit to do it. Other than that, he's perfect, he's smart enough, he's charismatic enough. See, he's not one of those guys like, oh, he's pulling his punches, he's acting dumb, like Ray is acting like a pushover. No, he's the alpha dog, he's a cult leader for real, and he would be a cult leader as Red John too, right? Both with people in law enforcement, Blake Association, and otherwise like, you know, Dumar and Rebecca and these people in law enforcement, Craig O'Laughlin. Those are sort of the big 3 within law enforcement who follow him, but also outside of law enforcement, like, you know, all these other people who would sort of die for him, Lorelei and others, you know, Lennon, things like that. So his cult-like following is a perfect fit. The charisma is there, certainly. We see how smart he is, how he always toys with Jane. The playful element is there. Pretty much everything is perfect. The actor is perfect, Malcolm McDowell. The only thing that's missing is he's too old, both to fit some of the profiles that, like, oh, he would have been at the Ellison farm as some kid to paint the thing on the thing, even though he's the leader of Visualize, so he could have arranged to do that some other way. But, I don't know. He's too old. He's too unathletic. He's not really handsome enough for, you know, Sophie Miller's description or Rosalind Harker's, you know, intimacy. But again, his charisma is almost so good you can almost compensate and understand that. So the only thing I question is his age and physical fitness, and I also question maybe his playful side a little bit, even though he is charismatic. And now, why is Bertram the number 1? Again, he's in law enforcement, high role, high stature, high level of charisma from the perspective of media relations, but on a personal level, he's a little more stick in the mud, a little more awkward, almost like Bob Kirkland-esque. He is relatively smart. He has a few awkward moments, poker and stuff, but overall, I think, again, he seems adequately smart, even if, you know, surface level, or you want to say some of his acting, but he's not acting quite as smart as he could be. He is intelligent. He deals with media, so that side is charismatic. He lacks the charisma in the other sense, though, like the more street charisma, dealing with people like Renfrew and Dumar and Lorelei and Rebecca and stuff. It would be a little hard to imagine that he has that level of charisma. He does have that moment where he quotes from William Blake, a different one than Tiger, Tiger, so that almost made him seem suspicious. He's also suspected of being the mole for Red John in season 3, but that turns out is Craig O'Laughlin. He is a member of the Blake Association, so it's like he's still sus in other ways, right, that sort of help build the profile that, oh, he could be, you know, what you were suspecting was something else. Like, for example, he's in the cafeteria. Red John is in that cafeteria. If it was Bertram, it just wasn't Timothy Carter. So Timothy Carter was the one so he's almost watching Timothy Carter to make sure Timothy is doing what he's supposed to do, and he was going to go and kill Hightower if she appeared or whatever. But he's actually the real one, right? Carter's the fake, and Bertram's actually real. So he was actually there, and he was being suspected, just in a different sense. So it kind of works. Again, all the suspects have their flaws, but he has everything besides the playful side. He's a little stick-in-the-mud stiff, and he also lacks the charisma in a different sense. He has like half of it, again, media relations, and the element of intelligence, or at least believable that he could potentially possess those enough to be Red John, but not the, again, playful charisma element. He matches the physical profile a lot better, at least, than Brett Stiles. That's the problem. He's a little bit younger. He's a little bit he doesn't have hair, so I mean that works, that he wouldn't leave hair samples behind. That's one of the biggest things these crime shows miss. Like when McAllister's in the church, he leaves his fingerprints everywhere. The fingerprints of a dead man at that point too, so that's highly sus. Maybe he doesn't care, like, oh, he's going to kill Jane, so it doesn't matter, but why go through the trouble of faking your death if you're just going to leave your fingerprints everywhere, right, of McAllister? Even if it's the person you DNA swap for, that would be weird too. Like, they're going to find the fingerprints on the banister. He touches the cloth with his bare hands. He touches the seats with his bare hands, like the pews and stuff. And then he also, he doesn't have much hair, but he would leave a few hair follicles behind. He should almost be wearing his mask and garb. So he shows up very unprepared there. He lets Jane pick the venue, even though it's Bertram, but effectively. So he lets Jane pick the venue, so Jane knows ahead of time. He goes, he puts the gun there. So see, this is why it falls apart as far as Red John's planning. Red John's planning to appear there, McAllister, and so he searches Jane, but he doesn't search the venue, so he doesn't find the gun. Now, instead of a gun, what if that was like what if that was like a hidden camera, like a little nanny cam that would be invisible to the naked eye? You would think he would sweep the area at the church that he knows, that Jane knows ahead of time is going to be, right? He knows Jane knows where it is, so he could easily go there and set up a camera, a nanny cam, so the whole thing would be on footage. Don't you think Red John would check for stuff like that? So it could be anything there. Pretend it's not a gun that Jane hid there. It's a nanny cam, and now you'll see that, oh, Red John is McAllister, and he has that broadcasting to the CBI or whoever, to Lisbon, and you'll have this on video. So even if you do kill Jane as this last act, he'll have you on video admitting you're Red John and saying all these things. Like, don't you think Red John would have swept that area? It's one of two things. You wouldn't let Jane dictate where you meet, right? And then even if you do, you would search it better. And then even when you search him, okay, you missed the pigeon, I get it, it's a magic trick. Jane's good enough to do that, but I find it hard to believe that Red John wouldn't search every area that he goes in, or be sure that there isn't like a camera there, at least when he's going to reveal himself for the first time ever as Red John, as McAllister. He's never done that before, except to maybe Lorelai or Rosalind, or even then he uses an alias with Rosalind and she's blind. Lorelai knows presumably who he is for real, like McAllister, and she also knows, or Lennon also knows, and maybe Renfrew also knows. These people who know McAllister's real identity. Even Renfrew, I'm not 100% sure, but so you're going to a scene where you're acting as Red John without your mask on, without your other garb on, right? And yet you're not searching the venue enough for cameras or in any other way. You're not careful enough to wear gloves. So that's why it's completely a throwaway scene. It's like, it's easy to catch, how would you possibly catch Red John? Well, it's easy when he basically catches himself. He volunteers to appear at the church when he doesn't have to, right? Jane's not doing anything to earn that, right? Jane comes up with, oh, it's McAllister, and McAllister's still alive. So he has the pigeon, and he has the gun ready, but so what? So what? He doesn't have to be there. He faked his own death. So let's say Bertram kills him, like the association basically planned, or Oscar kills him, then there's nothing you can do. Right? What would Jane do? Throw the pigeon at Bertram? Throw the pigeon at Oscar? So there's no real plan there. So McAllister volunteers to appear there for no reason. He doesn't have to. Then he volunteers to gloat. Then he's not wearing his gloves. Then he's not wearing his mask and other garb. Then he didn't search the church for potentially a gun that he knows Jane could have known to put there, because he lets Jane choose the venue, right? Or Bertram lets him choose, but in other words, that information would be conveyed that, Jane said the church, and so now you would either say, no, I'll choose the venue, you meet me where I tell you to, otherwise you don't get to meet at all, as Bertram basically saying that through Red John's instructions, or the association's instructions, which is effectively Red John, as we find out, that he basically is the leader of it, and he created it and stuff like that. So rather than let Jane choose the venue, not only do you let him choose that, which is uncharacteristic of Red John, no, you'll meet me on my terms where I want you to, he also doesn't search the place adequately, so there could be a nanny cam or something hidden where he puts the gun instead. Not only does he not search it, but also he just comes to the church for no reason, just to show off, And then not only does he come to the church just to show off, he also isn't wearing gloves or his other garb. And then he also takes the breadcrumbs from Jane. And then he also doesn't have a backup plan or an escape plan like a car. And he also doesn't have any other weapons on him like a pistol or something besides that one. So the final list is number 1, Bertram. Number 2, Brett Stiles. Number 3, Bob Kirkland. Number 4, Brett Partridge. Number 5, Ray Hafner. Number 6, Thomas McAllister. Number 7, Reed Smith. So the actual choice escapes only by 1 slot. And arguably, even just given the screen time of Reed Smith, it would almost be like he'd be better. But the problem is most of the content when he's there, he doesn't give off any charisma. He's just, again, he's like a average guy at best, little headstrong, little, brutish at worst, like just there's nothing really there. He's kind of obnoxious. Like there's no faint trace, even if it's Red John. Again, you could say it's an act, which again, anything that doesn't fit. So by that logic, it could be anybody. It could literally be, there was some list online that they had as the series going on, I think, that I saw, like Dean Harkin was the suspect, and it showed like everybody he ever shook hands with. Dean Harkin was the guy at that facility where he does the little gambit with the virus, where he makes Lisbon think she's going to die, right? Code Red. Dean Harkin would have nothing to do with anything, but he would still be a better suspect than, because they shook hands and he was a bit of a dick, he's a Red John suspect all of a sudden, or something like that. So that's how throwaway and stupid it is. But the reason why Reed Smith is actually last is because, again, his body build doesn't match at all. So how would you explain that? They never address it, right? So for all Jane's particulars of like, this little thing can disqualify them, or this little thing is the reason why he's Red John, like, or how he thinks in general, how could he not being such a bigger body build, right, which doesn't fit at all with any description ever of Red John, or even just what you would think, if you're going to be doing all these activities and escaping and whatever, it would require a different sort of build than what you have. How could that not disqualify him? So that arguably makes it even worse. And again, his appearances don't add anything to it. I actually like the performance, and I don't dislike the character. I just dislike it as a suspect, right? How can it be? There's nothing about him that would make you think that. Like, he's not charismatic. He's not attractive, with all due respect. He's not physical, athletic enough. He doesn't match the build or the athletic type that you would need to be, or what anyone else would describe, or being with Lorelai, being with Rosalind, being even with Sophie Miller. None of these descriptions match, so I don't know why they even did that. Right? Jane would have to explain, you see, I think he's wearing a disguise, and that's not really what he looks like, and somehow it's all just makeup or something. Like, okay, fine. I wouldn't put it past Red John to do that, but you know what I mean? That would be how wild. It's like a Phoenix Wright theory. Like, is there a character like that in Phoenix Wright where, spoilers, I guess, if you haven't played them, but like, what would be a character where they look completely different? Yeah, like the Phantom from Dual Destiny. It's like, of course, he just looks completely different than that, and we never even see what he looks like, but he's wearing like a disguise and a mask. It would have to be some crazy shit like that. He's like some super spy who's actually wearing some sort of bodysuit that's not actually him. That would literally be the explanation for how it's Reed Smith, because otherwise it doesn't make sense at all. They always describe like an average build. He's slender, he's slim, he's tall, something like that. At least like he's not fat. That would stand out. So like that's why Ray makes sense. That's why Bertram kind of makes sense. That's why Kirkland kind of makes sense. McAllister, like they all have this sort of lean, slender, or average build. Right, they're white, they're average build, wearing a baseball cap, whatever you want to say. Nobody ever says they're fat. And so, again, in fact, the body type doesn't match the rest of the suspects. So whatever criteria you're using, right, and again, Brett Stiles is a bit too old, but I still think that would be easier to explain away, and he's such a fantastic character with his charisma and intelligence. He's the only one that's like, as he presents himself, you could believe it, because like he's smart enough. He never seems dumb in any interaction. He seems very smart, on Jane's level, kind of, right? They kind of always have this rivalry back and forth where they're exchanging words and blows and insults a little bit, but they also have like a mutual respect, almost in friendship, where, there's like a little banter back and forth, but they still respect one another's capabilities, and so you could see how that would fit with being Red John, where there kind of is a bit of respect there too. Even though Jane hates him, he still has to respect his ability. So it's such a perfect fit that I think, and also the actor is great, Malcolm McDowell. That would have been my personal pick. Again, Bertram kind of fits a little better just because of the age and the build and everything. It's hard to imagine Brett, even at the beginning of the series, he's still pretty old. It doesn't match up with a lot of details like the farm, and it doesn't match up with, being able to go out and do all these killings and even being able to woo all these women and be be that way. The charisma, though, is on point. So that's like my fan pick. And again, you might say, oh, it's too obvious, but one of the fan theories was obviously Brett Partridge from the beginning. His first line is like, Red John enters here, meaning not his hypothetical scenario that he's playing out of what the killer did at the crime scene, like as he's describing it in episode 1 of the pilot, he's just actually describing himself. Haha, what a joke. Like, this is how fans think, or even just, he's in a situation where he's so sadistic and into his work, basically, that would almost reflect that into his work, not as a coroner, forensics, etc., but no, he's not a coroner, but whatever. Not as somebody who's at these crime scenes, but he's into his work, as in he's the one who did it in the first place, and he can't stop sort of salivating over it. So, again, that's sort of a fan favorite. But no, I think they chose one of the worst picks, not even because of the actor being bad or anything like that, or even really the character being bad, although it's a bit inconsistent and a bit dull ultimately. But it's just, there's nothing really to it that you could latch onto. You could latch onto Brett Stiles and say, okay, he gave Jane this clue, like your friend John is planning this party. That could be Red John giving him a clue, as he sometimes does, like the tiger and stuff. So you see how that can actually make sense and actually work a little bit.